Well, I'm glad that you're here today, and I'm glad that it's a more intimate gathering, so we can go off script as much as possible. By way of introduction, my name is Jim Greer. I'm the Utah Sales Director for Stability Networks, and Stability Networks is a provider of network services, and we design, install, maintain, and manage computer networks for small businesses and medical practices. So what we do is really help practices identify and prepare their practices for implementing electronic health records. So the presentation that we're going to go through today will cover four basic areas. It'll help define what a simple, efficient network looks like. It'll identify those threats and vulnerabilities to your network and to your practice. Talk about preparing for electronic health records. In other words, what you can do to make sure that your network is ready to adopt an EHR. And we'll also introduce what we consider a fully integrated practice network to help you know what is possible with a network once you've got that installed. But first I'm going to talk about what a basic network is. If you have at home a simple network, whether a wired or wireless, you might be a little bit familiar with some of these terms that we'll use. But I wanted to identify for you, for your practice, what kind of a network is going to work best for you. And the first key component of the network is what is called the router. And the router is the interface between your network and your internet service provider. A lot of times your ISP may give you a router, or you may have your own. But it's critical that that router be one that can be managed and can be controlled, because that router really is the gateway between your business, your practice, and the rest of the world. It really controls what goes out into the internet and what comes in from the internet. So that is a key component that needs to be commercial grade and one that can be controlled, because it has both hardware and software controls to it. The next item is what's called a firewall. Now, many times in your personal home, you may have a firewall built into your router if you have a wireless router. But in a business and in a practice, it's most important that you have a commercial grade firewall, which is a hardware device that's programmable, which means that you can set the standards and set the levels of control of information that's passing through it. The information that comes in and goes out of your network goes in what's called packets. And the firewall actually goes through and identifies the contents of those packets. So when you set up the rules for your network, and specifically for the firewall can then read those packets as they come in and then pass it through if it meets the requirements that you've set. And the same thing on the going out as well. So a commercial grade firewall is essential for the security of your network. The next item is a switch. And if you've been to some of the big box stores, you may see some fairly inexpensive switches that you can use. Really what a switch does is control the traffic within your network itself. In fact, all the data that runs in and out of your network goes through the switch first. So once it gets past the firewall and the router, the switch determines where in your network that information goes. So it allows you to have access within the office to printers and scanners and faxes. It allows you to pass email to one another and get to the and get to the server and access and get to documents. The next item obviously is the server, which is really, for the most part, the heart of the network. Now the server, some people may think of it as just like a souped up computer or a PC, when in fact the reason that it's called a server is because it provides services to clients, and users on the network are called clients. So it can be a mail server or an email server. I was going to say it could be a male or a female server. It could be an email server, it could be a web server, it could be a document server or a print server. And in most small practices, it does everything. And the most important part is that it be maintained on a regular basis. That's why I said it's not really just a souped up PC. A good server is built to be run on a 24-hour-a-day basis, so it really never gets shut down. That needs to be maintained on a regular basis. That needs to be monitored and managed. So too often, many businesses will put the server into service and then just kind of leave it there until one day it crashes. Well, when you think about the importance and the requirements of HIPAA, you really have to make sure that that server is maintained and remains secure all the What next connects to the server is what is called a backup device. And they take many forms. In past history, they were tape drives. And nowadays, they're becoming external hard drives and even a non-hard drive backup. But what happens is, all the information that goes on your server, or maybe even on some of your workstations, should be backed up. And so it's not just a way of saving files, but it's a way of creating an image of the server so that in the event that the server crashes or there's some other catastrophic event, you can rebuild that server based on the files that are stored in that backup. Too often people look at the backup device as just another place to store files, when in fact it's really your lifeline. So even beyond that, it's always recommended that you have at least two backup devices. So you can do that in a couple of ways. You can have one that's off-site, maybe in the cloud or over the internet where you can store your data. But we usually like to recommend that you have two hardware devices. And as you back up each week, you'll take one device with you, leave the other one in the office. The next week you'll bring the other one in and plug in that one and take the other one back. That way you're not going to have all your data in one place. So if there's a flood or an earthquake or a fire and all your equipment is destroyed, you'll have that backup and you can rebuild the server in your network based on that data. So that's a critical point that most people don't think about. That's really the main purpose of a backup device. And lastly, one of the things that we often forget about is power. Years ago, we had a series of microbursts come through along the Wasatch Front. And at the time I had an office in Provo, and actually I got a call from one of the prominent citizens. He happened to write a book about 7 habits or something. Anyway, they had called, and what had happened was the microburst hit their area, had sent such a huge power burst through the system, it basically blew up all the electronics in the house. So an uninterruptible power supply, or UPS, is a device that plugs into all of your components, primarily your server and your other key network components. It is a constantly charging battery. And what happens with the UPS is if at any time the power goes out of in your office, the UPS will continue to power those devices within the network and until the power comes back on. Now, if the power doesn't come back on, the UPS, which is communicating with the server, will know to tell the server it's time to shut down, and the server can go through its normal process of shutting down. If you've ever at home had someone unplug your computer or at the office while you're working on it, you not only lose the data that you're currently working on, but often you can really corrupt the files on your computer. Well, that's even more of a big risk on a server. So this is a real good way of not only filtering the power that comes through, but also protecting your network and making sure that you don't lose critical data as a result of a power loss.